Welcome back to Alberta Primetime, and the vocal point now. A new list of Canada's top 10 entrepreneurial cities reveals great things for Alberta, but also a disturbing trend. The Monday Money panel is ready to tackle that, plus what those big ship contracts mean for our province, landlocked Alberta. Rod Gilbertson is president of Edmonton Economic Development Corporation. In Calgary tonight, Shafik Hirani is a director and senior executive financial advisor with Investors Group, and from ATB Financial, economist Dan Sumner joining us as well. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Hello.
Hello.
Alberta dominates a new list of top entrepreneurial cities in Canada. 6 of 10 are in our province this year. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business puts Grande Prairie at number 1, followed by Lloydminster. We'll take at least half the credit there. Edmonton, Wood Buffalo, Red Deer, and Lethbridge also rounding out the top 10. Dan, why did Alberta do so well? Grande Prairie in particular, number 1. What is that city doing right? Is there a common thread with any of the others?
You know, really, yeah, kind of an interesting survey. The entrepreneurial spirit in Alberta definitely runs deep. We have a long history of entrepreneurial spirit in this province. I found the Grande Prairie one kind of interesting. To be honest, the Grande Prairie economy hasn't been particularly buoyant relative to some other areas of the province. So really, I think this kind of shows that it's the inner spirit of people up in this community and in some of the other communities that's really driving their strong entrepreneurial sentiment.
So Dan, it's not just the fact that they're somewhere in Alberta where oil is the big driver.
I really don't think that's it. I mean, plain and simple, Grande Prairie's economy hasn't been that strong relative to, say, the Wood Buffalo region or the Edmonton region. So, there's got to be more to it than that.
Shafik, Calgary not on the list. Why?
Oh, Calgary was. We were number 21.
Okay, top 10, sorry.
We just weren't in the top 10 yet. The report is wonderful because, first of all, the self-employed, the entrepreneurial spirit and the principal agent-type contract is where you generally see the wealth building in any kind of throughout Canada. It's not on a employee-employer type relationship. So I think it's wonderful to see Grande Prairie back-to-back winning this top entrepreneurial award. The one thing I would caution is that the regulatory framework in Alberta isn't as strong as some of the other provinces, and if there is anywhere to improve, that's the area that they need to focus on.
Well, that is an interesting point because the survey scored presence, which is basically just the level of entrepreneurialism in a city, perspective, how optimistic and the expectations that they had, and policy, local government influence on business decision making. So Shafik or Ron, if you want to weigh in too, what are they talking about there? What's the problem with local government influence that you see?
It says two problems here. The first problem is that there is good benefit locally. We have to understand that provincially, Alberta has the lowest corporate taxes in Canada. So to say that we're struggling on the policy side is not the full story. I mean, taxes help businesses stimulate growth. So on that side, it's good. On the negative side, the regulatory infrastructure, the policy the framework isn't there. And so basically, entrepreneurship has thrived not because of the government, in spite of the government. So it's a little bit of a change.
Ron, thoughts on that? I mean, maybe not based on this survey, but just what you've seen.
Well, I agree with a lot of what I've heard, but I think if you ask us, there's probably 3 major reasons why most Alberta municipalities do well. Number 1 is the economy. Is that you have to thrive as a business, you have to have a strong economy, and we've seen that for a number of years now. Alberta does lead the country in terms of the economy, so it creates a lot of opportunity. I think the second one, and maybe this explains a little bit of why maybe Calgary fell ranked
21,
lower.
Edmonton number 5.
Well, I think what you'll find is the business environment in Edmonton and some of the northern communities is much more dominated by small and medium-sized businesses. Like Calgary is very famous as a corporate town. You see all the major oil companies here, but If you look at Edmonton, look at Grand Prairie and some of those cities, the real strength of the community are these medium and small-sized businesses that really generate a lot of the economic activity. And then the third reason I would say is, again, we have a very favorable tax environment here compared to almost anywhere else in Canada.
Is it necessarily a bad thing or a good thing if it's small, medium-sized businesses or large corporations driving a city?
No, but what you'll find is if you're talking about entrepreneurial spirit, that tends to be more prevalent in the smaller corporations. So no, I don't think there's anything good or bad about it in any way, but it's just that if you find the Calgary economy tends to be dominated by large corporations, right. The Edmonton economy tends to be dominated by small and medium-sized corporations.
So Dan, Alberta has the momentum clearly. As an economist, what's on your radar for the future? What will keep it? What could kill it?
Energy prices. It's really that simple. I wish I could, give you a fancy answer, but it's all about energy prices. Oil prices are strong right now, and that's driving things all around the province.
Well, and that's what Ron mentioned, the strong economy, having that as your foundation.
Yeah, but I think it's more, assuming that energy prices remain strong, then the big challenge we're going to have, especially some of these smaller companies, is labor supply.
Right.
We're hearing this right across the spectrum, that if you're a company and especially if you're focused on the activity in northern Alberta, labor supply is going to be a big issue in many years to come.
We've obviously got a story that relates to that coming up. Alberta survives with labor from coast to coast. Do a pair of big ship contracts mean workers are whispering, we don't have to go west? That's next with the Monday Money Panel. A huge shipbuilding contract is awarded to Nova Scotia, $25 billion, and another to Vancouver worth $8 billion. Already, we are hearing murmuring among workers on both coasts. We don't have to go out west now. Dan, should Albertans be concerned that this could deplete labor pools here?
Albertans in general should be concerned about labor pools. These contracts are huge, but then in themselves are not going to make a major difference in our labor supply. Just to put these numbers in perspective, $25 billion is huge for Halifax, but I think that's over roughly the next 30 years. And in Alberta, we're running over $30 billion a year in energy sector investments. So, still a lot of investment going on here. The bigger issue, though, is labor supply in general, which is really just going to be a major issue for Alberta.
Shafik, thoughts on that one?
Yeah, my in-laws are in town, and they just flew off the plane from Halifax yesterday. And the first thing they said is, we just got $25 billion. And my father-in-law is the ex-justice minister for Halifax, and he looked up the GDP of Halifax, and that's about $30 billion. So this is a monumental impact to their economy. I do think it will affect the Alberta economy because we had an issue with employment when oil prices were high. If not only are we going to attract less people from Halifax and Vancouver, but I think people might be going home. So that hurts with our immigration, and that, like Dan was saying and Ray was saying earlier, that hurts with our employment rate and our GDP.
Ron, $25 billion, big for Halifax, but not so much the oil sands.
Yeah, I think we have to put things in perspective. First of all, we're facing a major labor shortage here over the next decade. So anything that takes away from the available supply of labor is going to be a big issue. But if you want to put it in perspective, as I said, they're talking about a $25 billion contract over about 25, 30 years. Well, right now, the latest number from the Oil Sands Developers Group, just on extraction investment in Alberta, is about $290 billion. So while the Maritimes are very important supply of labor, they're only one portion of the supply.
And Dan, is there other bigger competition? We've got a non-NDP government, a Tory government in Saskatchewan doing things quite a bit differently next door. That's a whole different competitor lately, isn't it?
That's a really good point, Jennifer, actually. I've tracked a lot of migration numbers over the last few years, and Alberta used to receive a lot of workers from Saskatchewan, and that flow has really cooled down recently, and it's all about the investment that's being funneled into their natural resources. So overall, we're competing with Western Canada in general for workers. Even, a lot of the mining projects in BC, they're trying to attract workers. It's in Saskatchewan. We're in a tough labor market environment for companies.
Does the the shipbuilding contracts or anything else going on in hot provinces also affect supplies of the goods that we need to build oil sands facilities and infrastructure. Steel, for example. Do we see an impact there?
I would think that in 25 billion is a lot, but over 30 years and look in terms of world supply, I think the big macro issues are probably more important. But again, I keep coming, you can transport steel and commodities around the world relatively easy. People are a lot more difficult. And I think, again, that's what we keep coming back to. When I'm talking to companies out there today, it's just constant, especially if you're in anything to do with Northern Alberta. The shortage of labor is bad, and all the demographics are showing that it's going to get worse over the next 10 years.
Any insight from Calgary on not just the people, but the supplies? I mean, there was a time a year or two ago when Alberta was running out of aggregate. Do we see things like that as well on the horizon?
Go ahead, Dan.
Okay. I don't think the problem is really going to be on the goods. I think Ron made an excellent point. You can ship goods around the world relatively easy. It's really hard to move people. I know we've actually looked at how easy it would be to bring, say, American workers up north to Alberta, because the U.S. is battling a huge unemployment issue. We need workers. They need jobs. But really a tough thing to bring these American workers north. You think it would be easy, but it's just not.
The international barrier there, perhaps. Shafik, the Alberta government is eliminating $17 billion worth of cigarette stocks from the Heritage Savings Trust and all other public pensions, other government holdings. It's partly because Alberta is about to launch a lawsuit against Big Tobacco for healthcare costs. Perhaps it's only optics now that the lawsuit is brewing. Should this move have happened earlier? How does it affect the bottom line? There's a whole moral question. There's a whole financial question.
Yeah, and you know what? I love the move. I think you said 17 billion. I'm not sure if you said 17 billion. I believe it's 17 million.
17 million.
Out of a $15 billion fund. So it isn't, it is kind of peanuts in the grand scheme of things. But what I like about it is they're copying Norway's sort of list of they don't want to say unethical, but socially responsible investing. So they're not investing in tobacco companies, they're not investing in weapons manufacturers. And Norway has a $500 billion pension, and they've made most of the money from oil and gas. So for the Alberta Investment Corporation to copy this, it's actually, I think it's very welcome, but we don't have a list, and we are emulating somebody else's list. It is time we started to create our own of socially responsible investment.
Isn't that kind of a problem? Because really ethical, moral, does it harm the environment? I mean, there's a whole list of conditions, definitions that really are in the eye of the beholder. Should Alberta create its own ethics guidelines, Ron?
Well, there's a real trend towards ethical investing around the world, but back to this issue, it's only common sense. Like, we have governments around North America and around the world trying to put the tobacco industry out of business. Well, if that's the case, that'd be one of the last stocks. That'd be one of the last stocks I want to own. So, if we are successful, which I think it's important that we reduce smoking, I wouldn't want to own any tobacco stocks.
Dan, tell us more about this Norway list. I mean, how do they come up with it? How might Alberta start that list of its own? Because as even the head of the Alberta Investment Management Corporation said when asked about this, it's a real murky scenario. Everybody has a different idea.
Absolutely. It could be tough. I mean, you want to invest in ethical companies, but a company might have 95% of its business as completely ethical and then some small part that isn't. And it's hard to know these things for sure. It's all very gray. I think it's clear that the government, if they're going to go down this road, then they need to set up a set of guidelines as soon as possible and follow them and try to be as consistent as possible. You
could maybe look for the public hearings on that to last a few decades, because Shafik isn't the problem. I mean, we've got the oil sands. Some people call them the tar sands. Isn't that really going to be the big reason the government would never be able to create an ethical set of investing guidelines?
Oh, it's semantics, Jennifer. I don't think so. The one thing is that you have to understand that the Canada Pension Plan does have a list, and so does the Norwegian plan, and the Alberta plan, that $15 billion Heritage Trust Fund, doesn't. So the semantics are, what do we consider socially responsible and what do we consider non-socially responsible? I think they'll solve it within a month's time.
Okay, well, thank you all for your insight tonight. Good chatting with Ron Gilbertson this evening. He's president of Edmonton Economic Development Corporation. In Calgary, Shafik Hirani, a director and senior executive financial advisor with Investors Group. And from ATB Financial, economist Dan Sumner. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.